Hey YouTube. So today I wanted to go over a couple of tips when it comes to the learning curve for drawing. Um, in a previous video, I actually mentioned, a learning curve that like certain things are easier to draw than others. And, I realized that this deserves its own video. Um, I won't be drawing anything in this video today, but I did want to show like certain subject matter as to like what's easier and what's harder to draw, and that way you can help navigate your learning progression as an artist. So the first subject matter that I would say is easier to draw are rocks, right? Um, Rocks are a lot like easier to draw because they're completely non-symmetrical usually, right? They're non-symmetrical and they're organic objects. You can make these rocks a little smaller or larger than usual, and you can still finesse it perfectly fine, right? Um, some things could also be like a little out of perspective. Like for rocks, there's barely any perspective. That's the thing. There's barely any perspective. Really, the only thing that you need to worry about is like the shape of the rock, and like maybe the texture. But they're much easier to draw. If you're off by a little bit, like they're very forgiving. So that's why like there's a higher margin for error, and it's still gonna look perfectly fine. You'll still like have a good drawing. Um, they're easy to eyeball. There's barely any perspective. So like rocks, I would say are like the easiest things to draw, which is great for you want to stick to easier subject matter when it comes to learning, and it'll be a lot like obvious like later on. So the next the next subject so the next subject matter are tree roots or trees in general, right? Tree branches, tree roots. The reason why I actually recommend this is because there starts to be a little bit of perspective. Tree roots or trees, they're still organic material, so they're a lot easier. However, um, because there's a little bit of perspective, and depending on what you're drawing, there could also be like foreshortening. Here you can see a little bit of foreshortening with the tree roots, which is a good way to practice that. If you're having a hard time with foreshortening, of course, right? Um, but yeah, like it's a lot easier to draw because like there's still like a high amount of like margin of error, so you can still be a little off, but it's still gonna look nice. But there's definitely like a lot of opportunity for you to learn here. It's a little harder than the rocks, but still much easier, and especially when you know these are things that like we're very much familiar with. We've seen trees our whole lives, right? Like so I think it's a lot easier for us to draw on paper because we're very familiar with it. It's also an opportunity for you to practice like your line work. Certain lines can be like thicker than others, right? And some lines can be a lot thinner. This is a perfect opportunity for you to practice that, right? Um, like here, right? You know, you can like for you can practice your marksmanship to kind of add a variance in terms of like the depth of your lines, like the weight of it. Um, but yeah, like there's foreshortening, there's a little bit of perspective, right? Depending on how you're looking at it, right? Like for like a tree like this, where it looks like you're on the ground actually. So you're looking at it, you're looking up at the tree. So there's still like a little bit of perspective here, right? Especially with the branches going out like this. Depends on like how the picture is being taken, but there is somewhat of perspective here, despite it being organic matter, which is great for you to learn, right? Um, Otherwise, I think like this is like very good subject matter for most people, especially when like this kind of work, they can like I can imagine like some of these trees being like I don't know like reference photos for certain concept art. Like it could be like that this could be like some creature or like a monster of some sort for something, depending on the shape of certain things. Like you can turn them into you can turn them into concept art of some sort. Like depends on your imagination, of course, right? But you don't want to draw from imagination. You want to use reference photos. So like I can imagine, depending on the shape of certain things, like these tree roots, they can be used for certain ideas in the future, right? Certain sci-fi or like fantasy artwork. I can see that. Um, but yeah, the next level I would say would be like animal bones. I don't have too many here, and I think I should have added a couple more, like different variety of animal bones and things like that. Um, they're a lot harder. This is like much more on the next level. Like now we're dealing with now what we're dealing with is symmetry, right? Like there's a little bit of symmetry going on here, so you have to kind of get it right. Otherwise, it looks a little off, right? The left and the right side, they have to be symmetrical. Perspective is much more important. The good thing, in a sense, is that like, when it comes to certain bones, right? Drawing animal bones is like definitely a lot easier than drawing animals, because like when you're drawing animals, the position of eyes and ears and like the nose, right? They need to be in the right position, otherwise they look a little off. Now, animal bones, like people are not familiar with animal bones. Most people are not familiar with animal bones, especially depending on the animal, right? Um, and because of that, they won't really know if like the socket is a little off or the teeth are a little off. They're not really gonna know. Um, so that works in your favor. But these like unique shapes, they're like a great way for you to learn. Like uh, you can definitely like work with your marksmanship here, like with the line work, right? You can like kind of get like anatomy right. This is a perfect, like this is where we're like really starting to get into anatomy, drawing animal bones, and I've shown that in my sketch pad as well. Like I do practice this kind of thing. Great learning opportunity, right? There's like a bit of perspective going on, symmetry, um, anatomy, right? So like it's a lot harder, but still like great learning opportunity, right? Um, Also, like if you think about it, like a lot of this is just like what I said with the tree roots. The same thing applies when it comes to animal bones. The Whatever you draw, right? Like this thing over here. This looks like it's part of like the jawbone, right? But I can see this like becoming like a dagger of some sort. Like you can use this as like a weapon in like some fantasy game, right? Depending, like this can be the reference photo for it. This can be part of a weapon, right? Um, Same thing like here. Like I don't depends on the actual animal bone. Like imagine, I should have added it, but now that I think about it, um, like certain fish bones, like they can be turned into like spaceships of some sort. Right? This shape right over here, like this can be something like if it was sideways, right? Like you can turn it, like certain drawings that you do with animal bones, they can be turned into certain like reference photos for concept art, right? Depending on what it is, right? Like for sci-fi or fantasy, like depends on the needs, right? Depends on the needs of the project, whatever it is you're working for. But a lot of these animal bones, they are useful, right? They could be useful in the future, and if not, then you grow as an artist, which is like kind of the whole point here, right? You're supposed to be learning. Um, but yeah, after this point, then we're really getting into animals, right? Now, animals are great to learn, right? Animals are great to learn. Now that I realize it, I didn't add this before, but animals with fur versus without fur, I would strongly suggest the animals without fur. The reason being is, animals without fur, you cannot cheat. Like you can't cheat yourself, right? Like look, if you look at this bear, right? Let's look at the bear. Um, whichever one you're looking at, keep in mind like the heavy fur, it covers a lot of the anatomy, so it's easy for you to cheat, right? Whereas compare it to like the elephant, or there's still a lot. Like this is a better example. There's lighter fur, but it's not really covering the anatomy, so it's not giving you the opportunity for you to cheat yourself. Like you still have to get certain things right, like the positions of certain bones. Like it covers a lot less. You can think the same thing with like a turtle. Now that I think about it, or um, like an alligator, or depending on the animal, like furless animals, I would say are highly recommended when it comes to drawing animals, right? Um, insects as well. Insects, perfect. I don't know if you like insects or not. Most people, they probably won't. I don't. But drawing them, definitely great, because like they almost look like, like they can also be used for like reference photos for concept art, things like that. But yeah, like the fur, this is gonna like allow you to kind of cheat your way, and you're really only cheating yourself. So there's no point in that. I would strongly recommend you draw things like tortoises, elephants, rhinos, hippos, things like that, right? Things that are furless, so that you can really focus on the positioning of the eyes, the ears, the size of the ears, right? The trunk, like how long is the trunk? You want to ask yourself these kind of questions, right? Um, the tusk, right? How long is the tusk? Like how wide is the face compared to the rest of the body? Like where how do they walk, right? You want to ask yourself these kind of questions. How do they walk? And like how you know uh you want to ask yourself these kind of questions, so that you really want to learn as much as possible. Again, like for certain, it depends from animal to animal. Like here, uh you know the legs are very important. you know um there's a lot more to learn here with anatomy, which is great, right? Whereas like the bear, unfortunately, I think it's still a great idea to draw a bear, because like there's still always learning opportunity. um Cats, right? That also great opportunity to learn, right? Anatomy. um of course it depends on like the, again, like there is fur, but something you want to actually be careful of is that cats are a lot more certain animals where we as people are like a lot more familiar with. So that means that we are more prone to like easily detecting when things are wrong, like depending on like the position of the ears, or the eyes, the nose, things like that, right? If you don't get them right, it's very easy for like an average person to notice this. um so you want to be very careful, especially like the more common the animal is, uh the more careful you need to be. But yeah, like animals, I would say like are like much higher on the list of things for like the learning curve when it comes to drawing. And like understanding this kind of learning curve, right, is very important when it comes to progressing as an artist. Like after this point, I would say humans are like harder, right? And then after that, like it's actually debatable. It's like, is it humans, or is it um anything with straight lines becomes like much more difficult. Like modern architecture, like if you were to, not really modern architecture, I would say like architecture in general, like becomes a lot more difficult, because it's like, if you it's a lot, there's the, like I said earlier, the margin of error. It's a lot The margin of error is a lot more, it's a lot less, actually. It's a very, very little, because when it comes to architecture, right, they the if you get the if the lines are just a little bit off, the whole thing is wrong. And yeah, like you can't screw that up. You can't screw that up, unfortunately. So like humans and architecture of any sort, like I would really just stay away from it. I would strongly suggest, most people can already draw rocks very well, right? So chances are, like, if you're watching this video, like you probably already have this down. Like, I would stick to this tree roots. This is good material to learn. Good material to just like look up on YouTube. I mean, sorry, look up on Google, like tree roots, or like different types of trees, right? Depending on what they are, and then just draw them, right? And there's a lot that you can do with this. Animal bones, right? They're great. animal bones and tree roots, they're like great subject matter when it comes to learning. But yeah, like stay away from like humans, like anything like too difficult. The chances of you learning something from it, it's a lot harder. It, you know, so I would strongly like recommend like taking your time with like easier subject matter, because then you get to, focus more on fundamentals. You get to focus more on like, you get to focus on certain things versus others, like, like drawing a person. I strongly wouldn't recommend, because like, it just takes a lot more understanding of anatomy, which by the way you can gain from animal bones, right? Once you learn animal bones, then you can start to look at like a skeletal system, right? So you draw the human skull, right? You start with a human skull, then you start with like, I don't know, the spine, the rib cage, right, the hip bones. And I've made a video in the past about it, right? And then like you can draw the entire skeletal system, and then from there you can start to draw humans, right? Once you have that kind of understanding. But there's a learning curve to this. There's levels to this, and you know it's highly recommended that you stick to these kind of levels. Um, but yeah, I hope you guys liked the video. Hope you guys got something useful out of this, so you guys understand, you know, what to draw, and how to learn as an artist, like how to progress, and why maybe you're not progressing. Maybe you're just sticking to like very difficult things to draw. I would strongly like, if you guys are using reference photos, which you should, like you don't want to use like fantasy art as like your reference photos, because technically those are interpretations of something else. Like they use references, so their artwork is an interpretation of something else. And if you use that as a reference, which is like, you know like if that's a finished artwork of something that doesn't exist in reality, your whatever you create is an interpretation of an interpretation. So it doesn't really, it's not, maybe what you create is like going to be like, it's still going to look nice, of course. Of course it's going to look nice. But what did you learn from it? That's the thing. What did you learn from it? And that's the important part here. You always want to be learning. Um but yeah, like there's just certain subject matter I would, avoid, and certain subject matter that I would strongly recommend. Hope you guys like the video. Like and subscribe, and comment if you guys have any advice, or if you agree or disagree. Like please let me know. If you have any advice for me, let me know. Or any future content that you would like me to work on. Uh, I appreciate it. Thanks for your time. And I'll see you guys in the next video.